Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we are having a very interesting discussion about education. And the title of this Hangout is, Would a Living Income Bring a Revolution in Education? Now, we have discussed many times about education, the flaws in it, but we're going to dive into specifically the US education system with an expert that will enable us to start pondering beyond the usual questions about the deficiency in the system, but rather look at how it has defined the structure of our society in itself, how the education system has also affected the kind of decisions and choices that we make in our lives, and how it has, in fact, not contributed to create actual freedom in our society. So to discuss all of this, I am joined by Cameron Cope, who is a private math and science tutor for over 10 years in Houston, and he has this passion for helping his students to be able to be well equipped in order to live to their utmost potential in this world. He is the co-founder of TechnoTutor, and this is about him sharing his perspectives and experience investigations about the education system. So Cameron, thank you and welcome to the Hangout.
Hi, Marlen. Thanks for having me.
And to all of our viewers, we'd like to remind you that throughout our conversation that will last for about 40 minutes, we will have questions and comments that you can place for Cameron or myself, and we will make the best of our ability to, of course, answer them or give our perspectives. So to begin with, Cameron, I'd like you to share a bit more about yourself and what brought you into the education field to begin with.
Okay, my personal education background is in mathematics. I went to the United States Air Force Academy, and then I went to University of St. Thomas in Houston and the University of Houston to study some advanced math stuff. And in high school, I was not a very good math student. And so whether it was the right, I tended to get bored in school. So that's why I studied math, even though I wasn't like some kind of math genius or anything by any measure. And when I was finishing school, I realized very quickly that I could actually make more money as a private tutor than I could with my math degree working for a company. So, and I kind of like the freedom of being my own boss and all of that. So I started tutoring while I was still in school and just continued doing that afterwards. And it gave me a lot of experience working one-on-one with students of all ages. In the beginning, I just worked with anybody that needed a tutor that I happened to connect with. But after only a few years, really, I started working primarily with clients of the more elite families here in Houston, Texas. You know, kids that go to the top private schools. And the thing that really struck me, although it kind of took a while for me to realize, was that even these kids were struggling. Even kids of, you know, their parents are CEOs of major companies that you know of, and they're still not doing that well. So that led me to start kind of questioning, although I was already on a path of questioning a lot of things about our society. And this is just kind of a piece of real experiential evidence I could see with my own eyes, not from somebody else telling me that there is an issue. And the number one thing I saw was that mostly kids just don't really want to be there. They didn't really enjoy school. They didn't really enjoy their subject matter. And I've always loved learning, but I can relate because when I was in primary school up through high school, I didn't really enjoy the stuff we learned in school. Although, ironically, if I read a book in school, I wouldn't actually want to read it. But if I read it on my own, I loved it. So something about being in the school system, to get into more late, but that experience led me to start asking more questions within myself of why is the education system the way it is? Why do kids not like school? Why did I not like school? But yet I do enjoy learning. I love learning new things, but I don't like being in school. So what's going on there? And that searching led me to a path where I am now working with TechnoTutor, which we can talk about probably at the end if you like. So that's kind of a short and a nutshell version of my journey so far.
Yes, we have previously also come up with the realization that the current education system is certainly not geared toward developing our human potential. So, what would you say is then the current purpose in the education system? And you being in the US
Yeah.
specifically, if you can share on that as well.
Um, I'll preface it with this. All of us have, I'm assuming many of us and those listening have been through some education system, even if it was homeschooling, although that's really hard to say because, you know, your experience will be very different depending on your environment there. But let's just say we're talking about the classroom and school, that traditional idea. If you really wanted to teach a child something and have them really understand what you're talking about, okay, would you have them learn 7 things all at the same time? Would you tell them that if they don't learn it within a very short period of time, you're either going to go on to the next thing and leave them where they're at, and you're also going to keep a record of how well they learned it, and it's going to affect their life, and you're going to ring bells, and you're going to, you know, put all this other external pressure, and you're going to have them learn all the things that they need for life while they're still in their developmental process as a child, and with all the pressures that we understand of learning to deal with your emotions and all of these things, especially in high school. I mean, if we just use common sense, if we had a child, we wanted to teach them something, would we use that approach? If you really truly wanted to learn, or would you be gentle? Would you be patient? Would you take each child at the pace that they need to go? Would you actually examine what it is you're teaching them? You know, one of the common things I hear from my students is, well, why do I have to learn this? And I went through kind of a process of, well, you know, you need to learn it because, you know, all the stuff I learned in school, like, well, because it's to get a job and all that. But I ended up towards the end of my kind of career telling my, you know, you may never use this information in particular. It's an opportunity for you to overcome a challenge that's presented to you so you can learn how to learn things. That was the best I could do as an answer to that question. But it was ultimately those kind of questions and just not feeling right within myself of why I decided to stop doing the tutoring thing itself and look for something that would really fundamentally solve this issue. And education is the foundation of our whole society. It's how children learn to operate in our world and how they see themselves in relation to each other and the environment and everything. So it's very important. I mean, obviously. So did I answer the question?
Yeah, in terms of the purpose of education, you did mention that you get to go to school and
Yeah.
you are certainly obliged to go through it in order to get a job.
Yes.
So that kind of sums up to what extent there hasn't been like an actual introspection as to how can we equip our children ourselves eventually with tools that can enable us to actually live. So we're being programmed in the education system from childhood, and this becomes like the very way in which we start learning how to see reality. So what's your perspective on this programming that we are being run by and that it is installed by the education system?
Okay. Firstly, you know, as you and I both are aware, that programming really starts even from birth, right? So not by the education system per se, but, you know, the moment we're born, we're absorbing information. So your home environment, your family, their traditions, their ideas, their education level, all of that has an impact. And the reason I bring that up is because the moment you enter school, you know, not all children are at an equal level, right? So some students have been exposed to reading. My mom started reading to me when I was very young, you know, and I even taught my little brother to read when he was born. So there was a home environment that emphasized reading and the importance of that and the enjoyment of it. And some children don't have access to that. They're just sat in front of a TV for 6 to 8 or more hours a day. And so that has a large effect on the student's basic vocabulary and reading ability going into school. And then when you're in school, what is the programming? Well, if you look at the word school, and I get this from John Taylor Gatto, who we can probably mention a little bit later, but he's an expert lecturer on education system and was a New York State Teacher of the Year several times. And he made the point that the only other usage of the word school in our language is when we're talking about a school of fish. And I really like that because if you consider what a school of fish is, it's all moving as one, right? And so that's, in essence, I think the fundamental starting point of what school's about is to create a person and create their mind and their relationship with the world so that we all see things one way, so that when like a politician or someone in an authority position speaks, we respond in a certain way, right? So there was a quote I had from John Taylor Gatto I just saw this morning, but he basically said the starting point of schooling is to create a reflexive behavior so that when authority says something, you respond in a certain way. And if you consider school, if you strip away the learning, just strip away all the learning and look at the physical actions that you take when you're in school. You go to classes, and why is it called a class? I mean, we have class systems in society, right? So why do we use that term? And you have bells, like we were talking about in the kind of pre-show discussion, the Pavlov's dog kind of reference their connection with ringing the bell and all of that. So in a nutshell, I would say the purpose is basically conditioning to have us all see things a certain way. And just another little interesting tidbit that I saw the other day when I was looking at healthcare is that if you go to, if you have an ailment, let's say, and you go to a doctor versus you take herbs or do some other treatment, call that, is it that taking a pill or getting surgery, having something removed is the primary thing, and everything else is an alternative? Like even eating, just changing your diet and eating more vegetables and fruits would be an alternative to the system. And I see that comes from school. They don't necessarily teach you about that per se, but everything is shaped in a way where you see authority as the primary point and everything else is an alternative. So you learn to respect authority. So I think that's probably the main thing we all get out of school, right?
Yeah, this inherent programming where we are taught that we have to obey authority, which is a great point, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because many times we don't even question, but where do I have this inherent fear toward authority positions or those that I've given the authority to? And we don't even question constructs then as how politics operate, how the money system operates. I mean, why aren't we taught about these things in school?
Well, think about that. We are taught about politics, and we are taught about history and all of these things, and in a way where whoever decides the curriculum gets to say and frame it first. So it's kind of like first impressions, right? I had a really interesting experiment I did back when I started tutoring, where I would wear just jeans and a t-shirt. And then sometimes when I would meet a client for the first time, and sometimes when I would meet a client for the first time, I would wear a suit. And then I noticed after I saw that client again, if I wore jeans and t-shirt, it seemed like I was dressing down. But if I wore a suit or dressed up to the other client, they thought, hey, why are you wearing a suit today? Why are you dressed up? So that first impression, a lasting effect. And so, for example, when you learn about the history of America, let's say, and Christopher Columbus coming over and all of the savages that lived here and all this stuff, like that forms an impression. Even if later on you get exposed to different information about maybe what really happened, you're less likely to question it. So
what's the situation?
Go ahead.
What I was going to ask, what is the situation, for example, in America specifically, with words like common, community, communism? It seems that from the education system in itself, you get conditioned in such a way that all that you have to seek is what goes along or follows the line of the preponderant system in itself, which is currently following your self-interest and looking not only after your own benefit, not really considering the whole. So is this part of how the education system has been geared toward like this individualistic perspective?
Exactly. I mean, if you look at what we're taught about communism in America going through school, it's placed as a totalitarian thing where your life is controlled. You have no individuality. You don't get to determine what makes you happy and pursue that. And we're taught in America, I mean, I remember growing up believing and thinking that America is the greatest country in the world. And I'm not saying, that America is a bad country or anything like that. But the point is that information was repeated over and over until it was accepted, so you won't question. And when you bring up the communism point, it's interesting because there is a tie with the word communism and community. So even at a subconscious level, when we think community, communal, communism, then anything that would be close to that, we're like, well, we don't want to live in communist Russia. And yet look at our behavior patterns, right? Who decides the things that you buy? Who decides the things that you read, the information that you're exposed to on TV, for example, and that your children are exposed to? I mean, we live in a collectivist society where society moves in a way to a few people, and yet nobody questions that, because communism and all these things are looked at as, well, that's not us. We're not controlled like that. We live in a free society. So we have a place for that where we can then not examine for ourselves. And I want to, if you don't mind, just go real quick back to the programming thing about school, because it ties in here. When you really look at school itself in terms of not only what is the conditioning that we're receiving in terms of the information, but how it's done in a way where it's really, I hesitate to use the word subliminal, because people usually have a certain context for that word, but the information is put in at a subconscious level, exposed to, and how quickly we have to do it. It's like you're given this insurmountable task, and only a few people can really do it really effectively. And not only, when you give the conscious mind an insurmountable task and it can't handle it, the subconscious mind steps forward to protect the conscious mind. So whatever information is being given, it receives all that in the subconscious. So that's why when I said, if you really wanted to teach a child and be, specific information, would you take this approach? You wouldn't. But if you really wanted to program them at a subconscious level, you would take this approach, right? And I really look at it as a form of trauma-based mind control. And I know that may seem like an extreme thing, but then you have to start questioning for yourself, okay, what are my attachments to trauma-based mind control? What do I actually think about those words? How has that been contextualized for me? And just to finish that point briefly, when you consider the people who do go through the education system effectively, what is the reward that they get? They get the jobs like doctors and lawyers and professors. They get to be in the authority positions. And going back to John Taylor Gatto, he was, I was watching a video with Noam Chomsky back from 1989, and he was explaining how the education system is designed to filter out the people that will obey authority, right? And they won't question, and they'll do BS, boring work just because they want to get ahead, and they'll memorize things. So we're taught to memorize and spit back information. And this is why, for example, if you go to a doctor and you have cancer, they'll only tell you chemotherapy, radiation. They won't tell you anything else. And when people say, but look, I cured my cancer with this, or whatever they did, they just, no, they have blinders. They're like, I can't see that. That's obviously just, that didn't happen. It was a fluke, right? Because they're not actually critically thinking. And there are doctors who do. I mean, tons of them, right? But the average person who just goes through the system and follows the directions, they have the information installed. And when you look at it, I mean, a doctor, a lawyer, these people are just walking books. They've read a book, they've integrated it, and they just spit it back. They don't question it. That's what school programs us to do. And so when something's in a book, it must be true. So you just repeat it, and away you go.
That's a very elemental aspect also to bring up, how we are then programmed to perceive the truth coming from these authority figures and not question it, which is the education system as it exists now is not promoting critical thinking, which we will go into further discussion. But I'd like to get to some comments we got. So this is from Joe Koo, and he's saying, on communism, one of the things that I noticed is that so often those who teach political history or theory themselves are not clear about what communism actually is. Our history and political theory education are not a science, but indoctrination.
Yeah, exactly.
Any further comment on it?
I mean, I think you sum it up pretty well. It's an insightful comment. I mean, we don't actually discuss that. Just something I'd like everyone to consider is, who determines the things that you read in school? Who determines what doctors learn when they're in medical school? I mean, think about it. If you were an alien, let's say, coming to this planet, and you wanted to know everything about how to heal the body and health and all of that, and you just had the internet, think about what you would learn versus if you just went to medical school. There's a huge gap. And I'm not saying everything in medical school is wrong. I'm not saying anything necessarily wrong. The information is there. Why isn't it all evaluated and used and everything? So, and that's a whole other topic in itself. But yeah, it's a good comment. Thanks, Joe.
I agree on this, and it very much reveals to what extent the way that we define words also changes the way that we perceive reality, which we will get to as well. There's also another comment from Dragan Strangina, and he's saying, hi, Cameron and Marlen. Why always when is education or school system for children discussed, there are no children there, but only adults? Any comment?
Well, I guess I have to understand more of the context of that question, but there's plenty of discussions on, you can do searches online. There's a great TED Talk. I don't have the link or anything, but you can look it up. Something like why, as a child speaking about his experience with alternative education, I think it's about free schooling or something. So there are a lot of children speaking out. It's a good question, though. I mean, obviously, actually, I just saw a documentary the other day called I think it was No Child Left Behind, and they were interviewing a teacher, and it was in New York, and they were doing their standardized testing, and she had the children write her a letter describing their experience within the standardized testing, and she had all of her children writing these letters, and she wanted to cry, basically. Like, oh, I feel all this pressure and I have to do well and I won't get a good job, and why do I have to learn these and take these tests? That's not how we learn. And, all this perspective coming from the children. I mean, clearly that is not why are children's voices not heard? Because they're not valued. Children are not seen as equals in our society. They're seen as, I mean, without being too explicit, they're seen as basically slaves to be programmed to go work in certain areas. And getting back to the whole point of education, by the way, this is a great book. If anyone hasn't heard of it or read it, I don't know if it reverses the words, but it says The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. It's a great book. He's got other books too. The Indoctrination system, which was basically to create disciplined soldiers. And if you look at the purpose, it was to bring people out of the fields from the agrarian society to work in factories. It's an obsolete technology because we don't need factory workers anymore, especially with the increasing of automation. And on that topic, another great book, Accelerated Learning for the 21st Century, especially the first couple chapters, really goes into automation and how the world is changing. And we don't necessarily need people working in factories sewing our clothing for us. It's a thing of the past. And whether we like it or not, the economies are developing and automation is becoming more of a mainstream thing. Those jobs aren't going to be there anyways. So we really need to critically look at how we're educating people to move into the future and not just, turn a bolt on a wheel or something. So it's a great question about the children. Their voices do need to be heard. And I guess, we're speaking for them as best we can. So.
Yeah, that's what I would also agree with, Cameron. And it's a great point that you bring on automation, which is another great reason to provide a living income, because times are changing and we can no longer sustain a model that has been on for over 200 years any longer. So I fully agree on that. Thanks for your comment, Dragan. So we have another one coming from Eric Eaton, and he's saying, hi, Cameron, I'm enjoying your presentation. How would you define the primary difference between learning and indoctrination?
That's a really good question, Eric. Learning is natural. It comes naturally to us as human beings. When you see someone else doing something or you do it for yourself, you'll quite naturally learn. Indoctrination is when you have a specific set of information that you want someone else to believe, so you drill it into their mind through repetition, through fear tactics, through all kinds of fancy techniques, so that when you ask them a certain question, you know how they will respond. So it's about predicting behavior, right? Whereas learning is just looking around for yourself. It's look at the difference between, just when you learn something new that you really enjoy. Like, I love playing music, and I can pick up an instrument and learn it and, have a lot of fun with it. And I don't necessarily need someone to show me all the details of how to do it. Although for myself, I may say, hey, look, I really want to master that and learn how to, learn more about it, the details, versus I'm just sitting here. Someone comes up and says, you have to learn this. And I'm like, well, why? Why do I want to learn that? Because I said so. Because if you don't, you won't get a good job. And then you start looking at the context of that point of how we, utilize fear and other techniques with children to have them learn things that they don't necessarily want to. And there are basic skills that everyone needs in this world. I'm not saying just let children do whatever they want. They don't necessarily know, because they're brand new. They don't know what this world is about. They don't know how it works. So we do need to provide them with basic skills like reading, vocabulary, some mathematics, right? But does every child need to learn chemistry? And if you study chemistry, what we learn in school, why are we only teaching the Bohr model and the valence shell electron pair method and, and quantum valences and all of that? Like, why are we teaching this when we know that information was outdated since the 1920s? There's new models that actually explain how things work, and yet why are we teaching them all this old stuff and not telling them, hey, this is just historical, give them the full context? And really, that's the biggest point about indoctrination versus learning, is when you're providing the context for something versus just, here's how it is. Like, for example, you want to learn to play the guitar. Let me show you how to do this. You'll play this type of music and you'll only feel this way about it. So that's my perspective on the difference between those two. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks for your perspective and also the question, Eric. I'd like to ask you and your perspective on the ranking systems based on who knows what, meaning places like Finland that take the first place on education system, and they have decided that they will make some arrangements in the coming years to, for example, merge some subjects and kind of let go of the individualized subjects. And this is also seen as the best education system in the world. So what's your perspective on it?
It's a great question. The first thing I asked when I started looking into Finland and their education system, because I'd heard they have the best system and everything. And I watched a few documentaries, I watched some different things of experts talking. And one of the experts, I don't recall who it was, but there was a documentary about the Finland education system. I can't recall the name of the person at the moment. But this person's perspective, anyways, was their #1 resource. And that they wanted their children to be able to compete in the international marketplace. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, being able to compete on the international marketplace. What I'm saying is that all you see a child as? Is that what a child is? And this may be kind of a radical view. I think a child is much more than that. We're not just a worker. It's very honest. We live in a society where there's consumerism and there's jobs, and it's all this way. So we need to fit into that. Sure, that's one way of looking at it. I think that we're here to be creators, to create the world that we would like, not just to accept the world that was given to us. Yes, I have no illusions about how the world is at the moment, but the only reason it's like that is because someone else thought about it and made it happen that way. So we have the ability as creative human beings to change what we see if we don't like it. Going back to the Finland point, okay, I'm not saying that they don't have great standards in certain contexts and that they are #1 according to certain standards, but if you look at who says they're #1, right, the United Nations says they're #1. They score the highest on the PISA exams, which is apparently one of the most challenging exams. But again, it's a standardized test. What is it measuring? Why does that make them the best? It's like we don't question that. Some authority said they're #1. So we all say, oh, okay, they must be that. The investigation that I've done, I'm not an expert on the Finnish education system, but the investigation I have done is that they basically make school more comfortable for students. There's less pressure, but it doesn't really address what it is they're being taught. Is the starting point developing the full creative potential of the human being, or is it seeing that people like Einstein, those are exceptions, everybody else just needs to be workers? I mean, is that the starting point? So I kind of look at it as, in Finland, it's like if you want to raise cattle, right? Do you want them to live in a small box with steel cages and feel unhappy the whole time before they get slaughtered, or do you want them to graze in the pasture before they get slaughtered? I mean, the end result is the same. It's just the experience. I'm not saying we should torture and abuse children in our current system. Let's do away with that, but let's also not just accept another model blindly, right? Let's actually get to the core of what makes us happy and confident in everything that we would like for ourselves. So that's my limited perspective on the Finnish system.
And Joku has placed a comment that goes very much in line with this. And he's saying, interesting would you say that with indoctrination, it's about creating a certain kind of personality within the learner to program the learner with a set of information instead of learning, which is actually an automated and holistic process.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. I really think the purpose is not actually to have you learn a set of information. I don't think anyone, I say they, like there's this they out there. I mean, it's just, to a large degree, the system is running on its own. It's reinforced by the economic system. So we tend to think that there's these people behind the scenes. And I mean, I don't think it works that way. I think everyone is acting out of their own self-interest and, shaping things. And the people who are in, they're going to have more of an influence. But in terms of this point, I think the information that's being imparted is not so much to have you learn that information as much as to contextualize that there is such a thing as a set of information that is the truth, and the authority is the one who gives that, and you don't get to think for yourself. So the personality they're looking for you to develop in school is one of obedience and following. So if you look at the two basic personalities that come out of school, I tended to follow in the latter, which is, or the first one being blind authority, following, accepting that. And the second one being developing a personality where you're just kind of in the back, like, this ain't for me. Like, school's not for me. I just want to goof off and hang out with my friends. Like, it's not for me. I kind of fell somewhere a little bit in the middle, although a little bit more towards the other side, although I did well in school. Because for me, naturally, one of the parts of my pre-programming is to be able to memorize things easily. And I knew enough that if I just tell them what they want to hear, I'll do well. But I don't actually care, right? And I know a lot of people have that experience. The thing is, most of us go through school and do not do like at the top. We're actually the ones who are kind of fighting back in our own way without realizing it, like saying, I don't want to be a part of this, right? It's not to judge anyone. If you go and you do well in school, it doesn't make you a bad person, right? But you are fitting into the system and you get rewarded, right? So if you don't follow along, you don't get the money, you don't get the reward of the doctor and so forth. So to answer the question, yeah, those two personalities are basically follow along, follow the rules, or totally rebel. And some people fall somewhere in that spectrum.
And this is also what eventually disempowers us. Why? Because we are learning that if I give you the right answer, then I will just pass a test and that's it. We only do it for that result-based type of mechanism, but we don't really look at what am I actually imprinting within myself as a person, what kind of values, principles. All of that is very systematic as well. So thanks, Joe, for your comment. And I'd like us to move on to, the main point within this discussion, which is with all of this that we've been discussing, how the economic system and its current functioning is affecting the way that the education system works, then how would you see that the provision of a living income would affect or create a revolution in the education system?
Yeah, it's to me a very obvious thing, right? If we look at what a living income actually would do for people. I forget who it was that said it. I think it was one of my friends, John Rose, who's a health expert. And he was making the point that if you want to control people, the key to controlling people's behavior and to conquering nations is the same. You don't let them meet their basic needs, right? And I think that was from Sun Tzu, Art of War, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, education is a basic need, right? You need to have certain skills to be able to navigate in this world. But really, what is the end result of what you're getting after when you go to school? You hold money from people, then they'll do anything, right? For the most part, to get money. I mean, and some people, there's so many dimensions to that whole point of how when you grow up and your perspective about money and how that influences what you're willing to do. My parents made me get a job, working fast food when I was in high school. And I was like, I ain't never doing this again. I don't even want to have a job. I don't want a boss. I don't want anything. I want to work for myself the rest of my life. Some people go to work at McDonald's and they say, I can do this. I can do this for the rest of my life. I hear the argument that, well, that's you know, for some people that's good. It's a good place for them if that's what they want to do. But the thing is, who's deciding that McDonald's exists? Like, who's deciding that that's the options that they have? Why is that the option? If you were in that situation, knowing what you know, would you accept that? Is that what you would want for yourself? And what was the original question you asked?
Yeah, in terms of getting the living income, and kind of being able to affect the way that currently the education system and the purpose that we discussed earlier on, which is only to create the perfect worker and obedient to authority, how would that also then, if there's no longer that pressure to get a job, for example, or go through 18 years of education, then how would that change the education system?
Well,
what would you actually integrate in it to also go hand in hand with the new paradigm of a living income society?
Yeah, so when I look at, when people ask me, for example, what are the solutions to the education system? Is it alternative schooling, free schooling, this, that? I don't think it's anything to do with schooling. I think the ultimate solution, like we're talking about, is a living income. I think even a living income is a stepping stone to a greater type of society, one that's based on a gift mentality, not simply an exchange. But to get there is a pretty big leap for most people's mentality, because we are so conditioned that we live in a world of lack and all these other things. If I imagine for myself, if when I was growing up, my parents didn't need money, meaning it was a basic right. They had enough, right? You're not Elon Musk or you're not Bill Gates, but you have enough. You know, you don't have to worry that if I don't go do survive, right? If I didn't have that kind of pressure, if I just know I live in a world where I'm a being, I live here, I'm a living system, just like a tree or a plant or an animal or anything. I'm a part of this world. Now, what do I want to do? I don't have to even have a thought in my mind that, well, but I have to survive. I have to survive, right? And I mean, school is just another competitive environment where we have to survive on a different level. I have to survive in that system, for example. So having that pressure taken off and having a person now being supported with what are the basic fundamentals, because if you remove that pressure, that means the companies who want you to choose them as your employment, because that's the only choices you have, because you're also prepared with limited information to only work in those types of jobs. Now hey, we offer really great opportunities here. You may want to come and explore this and learn and support us in our goals and missions. But you see, the freedom that you would have to make that decision would be a conscious, rational decision, not a decision based on a fear and a subconscious point. So taking away that tool of control, which is money, and not taking it away and removing it, but actually giving everyone the ability to access that. When you look at how the banking system works, when you go and get a loan, they're making the money out of thin air anyways. It's not like there's a limited supply. And you know, we're taught in school that all the explorers were going around looking for gold. And I was thinking about this the other day, because that's money, right? And I'm like, why would the kings and queens need gold? They're the ones who make the rules. Why would they need gold? They know it's limited. Why wouldn't they? I mean, it's all an illusion, all of this, right? However, it's part of the illusion that we've accepted as a fundamental part of our world. We need money to exchange for goods and things like that. So we need to work with that system. Once that is established, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine what life would be like when everybody is just totally removed that basic point of fear about money and worry. And then money becomes a tool, resource, things like a lot of these points in these chats. But that would be my primary thing. I think in terms of short-term solutions, as you mentioned, I work with TechnoTutor, and we're technology based on how the human actually learns and what are the fundamental skills that they need. It's not your traditional tutoring. It's not pounding down information. It's something that allows you to decide what you want to learn, because now you have the ability to learn very effectively. That's what makes me feel good, is when I empower a child with the self-confidence to say, hey, I can, whatever it is I want to do, I can do that. I can learn what I need to learn. And imagine if everyone felt that way, how different our society would be, instead of, well, I'm just doing this because I have to, you know, or because that's my only option. So it would radically transform society in a positive way. I can't see any drawback to it.
I mean, yourself as an educational entrepreneur, you have that direct experience of not only being able to provide children and parents alike with empowering themselves to have the basics of that you would see are the requirements to make an effective educational process, or an effective one in terms of things that currently are not being provided by the current education system, and how there are these deficiencies in America as well from the Common Core perspective. So I'd like to ask you about how would you see the American system currently, and even more with Common Core as a standardization of education, is dwindling or dumbing down people's basic abilities, or basic, like their basic ability to live in their full potential?
I look at it like this. If I had some goals that would, like, let's say I want a Ferrari. I'm not gonna be able to make that physically myself. I need factories. I need people to assemble the parts. So I need to organize lots of people and get them to do what it is I want them to do. By nature, humans are very creative. That's what we are. We're creators. We create in this. If I needed a lot of people to do something for me as my own self-interested personal goal, I need to access everyone's creative ability, but I can't take it from them because it only works with their permission, their actual doing it. So I have to place them in a state where they'll just do what I say, right? So Common Core, if you think about it, the word Common Core, it's supposed to mean a common core of information and standards. But the subliminal, the subconscious understanding of it is it's creating a common core, like a common computing core in a human being that only processes information a certain way and only looks at reality a certain way. So that core can be directed into someone else's self-interested goals, not in terms of what's best for the actual individual themselves, right? Not supporting them to have that full potential. By nature, when we come to this world, we are creative. You can either support that, like by watering a plant every day, or you can withhold the things that it needs and it will wither, right? So with Common Core, for example, just in a nutshell, it's basically creating a set of common standards and computerized assessments so that for each person going through school at different points, it can be measured their progress along the path of college and career readiness. College and taught in college, who does this benefit? And would you really want yourself or your child to take a test and someone say, well, it says you're good at this, this, and this. You're not even going to make it to college. You're 7 years old. You don't have this particular skill that actually is developmentally inappropriate for us to even try to measure at this point anyways. And yet we're going to put you on this path because you're never going to make it to college, for someone to say that to you, right? Especially considering all of the misdiagnoses for learning disorders and health problems and all these things that occur in our world. Do you really want to put your hands of do you want to put the fate of your child into the hands of a computer that was, not necessarily programmed with their best interests? So that's my perspective on Common Core. Just follow the money trail in terms of who's funding it, and you'll see very quickly what's the starting point behind it. I mean, it's really just it's a accelerated, more specific, more controlled, more systematic continuation of the current system that we have. So look at the world. Do you want everything you see to happen on the core? Right. So that's kind of where I see that going. Just a more controlled, docile, society.
So then we would say that the way to actually counteract what many call the new dark age of education in America is to start considering this linkage to the economic system and
Yes.
what we've been discussing. So this is also a way to empower everyone, parents and children alike, of course, to start considering how much of the way that we live in general is determined by the kind of education that we choose for ourselves and our ability to also change it. We have a comment from Joku, and this is in relation to basic income. He's saying, when the current structure of profit and money is corrected so that our basic needs are not held hostage, education would no longer be about creating slave workers, but rather become a method of empowering human beings to reach their greatest potential.
Exactly.
I agree.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, Cam, I'd like you to share with us basically what you would say is the foundation of an effective education system from what you've also witnessed with your students. And this will remain as a, let's call it a path to create solutions in this world, and also things that people can access to, because we understand that changing the education system at large will take time. So any, in the meantime, possible solutions, ways to empower children at this moment?
Number one, the education system is designed specifically. It's doing its job. So if you're an education activist, consider that the solution doesn't a totally new system that is based on the fundamentals, like you said, of what are the fundamentals of children need. And I'll get to that. Joseph Campbell said that revolution is not attacking a system, it's bringing something forth. And if you look at the root of the word education, it comes from the Latin educere, which means to draw out or to bring forth. So, I mean, I'm not ashamed to say that I work with TechnoTutor. If I didn't think it was a valid solution, if I didn't know it was, I wouldn't do it. I would still be tutoring. Anything that would give you the basics of unlocking your potential, which is the true meaning of education, to draw out the potential that resides within you, would be a valid solution, in my opinion. I don't see that occurring in schools. It's meant to actually lock up your potential, Common Core, right? To lock it up so that you don't have the keys to it. Someone else knows how to access it because they put all the words in, they put all the information in. If I program a computer and I give it to you, and you don't have access to the back end in the first place. So I would say anything where there's an expert saying this is what you need to know, I mean, developing critical thinking skills is important if we're going to get out of the mess that we're in, because there's so much information. Global warming, this, and I mean, conspiracy theories, like there's so much information. So the moment you try to get the truth of something, you get inundated with all this false information. And so it's really difficult to navigate through that when you have all your pre-programmed preconceptions. So number one, the solution is practically for a parent, I would not have your kids in a public school for sure, knowing what it does. I can't self-honestly feel good about saying, keep your kids in school. Even the private schools, right? If you're looking for the solution in school, it's very unlikely you're going to find it. And let me put it this way. Oh, if you're an activist especially, do the elite know how to educate their children? Clearly, they've been doing it for a long time. So how to educate a human being, we know how to do that, right? What we're doing with TechnoTutor, for example, is bring people so that everyone has access to it, not just a select few. But again, going back to this point, because I know there's people out there who are going to react and say, well, how can I not put my child in school? They need to have social skills, and parents they have to go to work. You need to have somewhere. Yes, these are all the things that are pressured onto parents so they'll just say, okay, well, I guess I better put him in school. I have no other alternative. I'm going to give my child to a complete stranger or set of strangers who don't actually care about my child like I do for the next 18 years or 12 years. If you just go up to graduate high school. The reason it takes 12 years is because it takes that long to get the child into a point where they will submit to authority no matter what, without question. I mean, look at our society, right? No one really falls out of this. Even the most enlightened, aware people still have their own programs and things running in the background that are, a process to actually walk through all of that. So just like that, our world is going to go through a process. There's not a quick, easy fix. I would encourage everyone to investigate TechnoTutor, but also to consider that fighting the system and trying to go to your local school board and trying to get them to adopt changes is a losing battle. you don't have the kind of resources to fight that fight, right? So don't fight, rather just find ways to empower yourself, right, through education, and to empower yourself through financial means to become more effective, to have more influence in this world. And it's going to take those of us who are in positions in our life right now, for whatever reason, that are aware of this and who have the physical ability to do whatever they can in this life. And for me, it all comes down to being the best version of myself that I possibly can be, right? And that's what I want for everybody else. Everybody wants to be the best that they can, right? And that's what makes us happy, is being the very best and having the best. And I learned, well, I wasn't that much younger, but a number of years ago, in my own journey to why am I not happy? Why is the world not the way I thought it was? Why can't I be happy? I learned the reason I'm not happy is because no one is happy, right? And the only way I can be happy is if everyone is happy. So really, if you want to be happy, look at what makes you happy. Ask yourself why that's not occurring, and how can you do your part to bring forth and be a part of the solution. It has to do with becoming, so blaming external authority or anything, right? Anyone who is an authority, who's controlling you or anything, is just taking advantage of the fact that you believe you need a leader or an authority or someone to tell you how to live your life. All we have to do is get back to the basics of being able to process information, being able to speak and communicate clearly, and being able to know when a technique of, like, you know, persuasion or influence is being used on us, and to get to stop in that moment, to breathe, and to be able to say, okay, I'm going to make a decision that's actually best for me and everyone else in this moment. And that is a process, right? There's many tools out there. I'm sure you guys talk a lot about those tools. TechnoTutor is one of those tools. So I would encourage everyone to look at that. And I give everyone my contact info. If you have other ways that you see you can bring things forward, I would love to network with other people. That's like one of the things I love to do, is to talk with others and activists and so forth. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we always say in these Hangouts, we very much focus on solutions. And I'm very glad that you mentioned that point about creating happiness for everyone, and as such, then creating our own personal happiness, because this world is so self-interest driven that we many times forget that the moment that we empower each other, essentially, that's where the real solution resides. That's where real happiness exists. And so with providing a living income as that financial security, along with the tools of education, as you've mentioned, with words and vocabulary and critical thinking skills development, being able to make effective choices, we will sure create a society that we will be glad to create and live in. Yeah. So any last words, just to finalize the Hangout?
I don't know. I really appreciate, you know, you having me on here and being able to discuss all this. It's me, I've found the point that I can make a real difference in this world, right? And I know what you're doing as well, looking at it from the living income side, is I mean, it's like we're kind of doing the same thing, just from different aspects in a way. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are doing those things, and I think it's really great that we are not shooting in the tent, so to speak, meaning fighting about, you know, my ideas are the best and I have to only do it this way. I mean, everyone that's doing their part from a self-honest perspective, right? Not just doing it because you want to feel good, but you actually see the results. And I think that's the most important thing that we look at, is not the ideas, not the theory, not what anyone tells us, but actually look at the result of when someone else does something. If you're looking at a system like the education system, what is the actual result it produces, right? So that being said, I've really enjoyed being able to come in here and talk, and if there's an opportunity, I'd love to come back sometime. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things that we usually point out and draw as, you know, education being the solution for many of the conditionings, because even the idea of not being entitled to a living income is part of that brainwashing and conditioning that starts from school, from our parents. So we will certainly be talking in the future, I'm sure about it. And thank you very much for your time and all your input. Thank you, the viewer, as well. And we will meet you once again next week in another live Hangout. So thanks, Cam, and see you next time.
Bye. Thanks.